China has a master plan for its automotive industry, aiming for world domination. It seems that a massive crash might actually be part of the plan. But before we look at this master plan, let's first talk a bit about the facts surrounding China's dominance in the manufacturing industry. China manufactures 82% of the world's solar panels, 62% of the ships, 76% of electric cars already now, 80% of the batteries, 90% of rare earth metals, and 90% of drones, meaning they have taken control over a large part of the world's most important manufacturing. And they're just stepping on the gas, moving forward and forward. In 2020, Xi Jinping said, "Make the world more dependent on China, make China less dependent on the world." But right now, it seems like the world is supposed to be saved. The Chinese car industry is being saved from the fantastically large, enormous, transformative crash that was looming behind. Built into a system designed by the politicians is both their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. Because while the world is becoming more dependent on China, China needs the world to avoid a huge crash. There has been a price war in China for over 3 years. Even China's largest car manufacturer, BUD, has felt this, and their profitability has dropped by 33% in the last quarter of 2025. The price war affects everyone. And BUD has actually lowered its production targets from over 5 million to around 4.5 million as they have adapted to reality. But now BUD is also a private company. They're not state-owned, so they can't just go around making all sorts of crazy deals. They have to make money. That's why the Chinese car industry needs exports to survive. China's master plan to take over the car world can be summed up in 3 points. Number one is build up car manufacturing capacity to be able to produce 50% of the world's total car sales. And already today, China can manufacture 50% of the world's total car sales. That's millions of cars. In the US, about 10 million cars are sold, so that's a check for point number one. Point number two, flood the car market with exports of really, really cheap and good cars. Today, Chinese car manufacturers have about 5% of the market in Europe, and it's said that by around 2030, they will have 10%. And experts say that already by 2028, there will be about 1 million Chinese cars in Europe. So you could say that's a check for number two as well. Except for the USA, which is resisting and refuses to import Chinese cars. However, this means that Europe is China's most important export market. That's where they're focusing. Point number three, limit other countries' access to raw materials, rare earth metals and so on, or sell them really, really expensively. This makes it impossible for competitors to compete. And do all of this at hyperspeed, which is exactly what's happening. In other words, they're pulling the rug out from under their competitors while also pulling the rug out from under themselves. When the dust has settled, say around 20 to 30, then maybe 100 to 150 Chinese car companies will have become 8. Experts say that to survive in the Chinese market, you have to produce 3 million cars. There aren't that many who can do that. And what has Europe done in the meantime? In China, several brands have already gone bankrupt and many, many more will follow. But the strange and exciting thing about this is that a large part of the Chinese car industry is state-owned. The state-owned car manufacturers don't play by the same rules as a regular one. Capitalist, so to speak, car manufacturer that has to make a profit. State-owned companies can operate at a loss. The question is for how long? Everything depends on the gigantic systemic flaw that might even be intentional. I don't know. At least in a true Darwinian spirit. Survival of the fittest. Last man standing, that's the game that's now reaching its crescendo. The big question is, can China afford these enormous losses if a bunch of car companies go bankrupt, which would lead to mass unemployment and a very, very subdued consumer appetite? All of China is built on increasing profits. Growth has to be there. They still have growth of about 5%. As long as there is growth, the politicians stay in power. But if the country goes bankrupt, if people keep getting worse off, then I don't think the party will be safe anymore. And of course, that's what they want to ensure. The politicians are caught in a trap. So car loans risk becoming China's new real estate crisis, which has cost billions and billions, which has led people to invest in homes that aren't worth anything. People might have bought 3 or 4 apartments because it was so profitable. Now, there is no demand anymore. Now, the value of homes has crashed and fewer children are being born. So there are fewer people who need a home. The real estate sectors are crashing badly. And the question is whether the car industry will be the next big crash for China. The big advantage is that you can export cars, but you can't export built houses. In 2017, they decided that they would manufacture 35 million electric cars by 2025, and already last year they had reached 31 million. So they are really on track, sticking to the plan. And what is behind this? Well, the provinces want to please the party, so they offer voter discounts on land, provide tax subsidies, they want to create jobs, they want to help the country and be a good part of it. Simply put, everyone working in all the provinces wants to be a good citizen. So everyone is focused on reaching the goals, not on achieving any kind of profitability. Already now, Chinese brands account for 90% of the market for rechargeable cars. In the past 5 years, the foreign, old, established manufacturers have lost 8 million in sales over 5 years. It's a slaughter. But it would be one thing if they were building cars that people wanted and kept the factories running. Now it's about 50% of the capacity in China's car factories is unused. The overcapacity is close to 20 million cars. And that's a factory that's just idling at half speed. That's not a profitable factory. Everyone knows that. Everyone understands that. And then we drop down a step on the food chain to understand how this works. The game is that you lose money, and that's the dealers. In China, 70% of car dealers lose money, so they're operating at a loss. What do? Well, they register and insure the cars to make them look like they've been sold. That way they get bigger discounts from the car manufacturers and receive bonuses. They make sure to help the car manufacturers sell more cars and meet their production targets. That's great, isn't it? It's kind of like riding a bike. As long as the money keeps flowing in and out, it works for a while. But eventually something's going to crash. The bike will stop. You won't be able to keep pedaling anyway. It has to end. BD's biggest debts are to vehicle owners. They're to subcontractors. That's where the money is. As long as you can keep things spinning, you get more money in. They use the subcontractor as a kind of creditor to keep the wheels turning, and that's not sustainably profitable either. And another trick that the companies have used to keep their finances going is having extremely long credit periods. For example, if you've bought airbags from a company, they've had up to 120 to over 200 days of credit. In Sweden, a bill is supposed to be paid within 30 days, but here in China, no. So now the government has said it must be paid within 60 days, and that causes problems. And what happens then to these cars that are registered, insured, but nobody wants to buy? Well, they channel the returns to grey market dealers, who in turn sell them off cheaply, maybe for half the price, or even bury them in a kind of car graveyard. There are large parking lots where only old cars are parked. It's even said that the cars are buried because it's cheaper to bury the cars than to sell them too cheaply. So you have to keep the wheels turning, and that's done at any cost. But it can't be profitable to manufacture a car and then bury it, scrap it. Of course, the government has noticed this and told the car manufacturers that they can't keep up this price war. It's not sustainable, it's not healthy, stop it. But that's easier said than done when you have targets to meet. And the state-owned car manufacturers say that they have targets and that profitability is not their focus. For example, Changan says that they aim to become one of the world's 10 largest car companies. If profit doesn't matter, then maybe Chang'an can actually achieve that. If there is enough endurance in these provinces where all the jobs are, which need to remain in order to keep the wheels turning. But the spiral is vicious. How long can it go on? Not even plug-in hybrids, which have been so profitable and have increased sales so enormously, seem to be the solution either. In fact, sales have actually gone down there. That is, the growth rate for plug-in hybrids has stalled. According to the Ministry of Finance, in 2026 to 2027, the subsidies for electric cars will be phased out by the Chinese government, which has stated that electric cars are no longer a prioritized activity for the state. It feels like they have realized that they've won this battle. Now it's about pulling out in the best way possible. We can't keep investing even more money in this and end up with this enormous crisis again. So no one wants to give in, but in the end it has to crash, right? Nothing can go on forever. There are no perpetual motion machines. There are no castles in the air. For example, the Chinese construction industry showed this when it eventually went under. So the solution is to export or die. And that's where Europe comes into the picture to be the savior for the Chinese car industry. So my question with this film is how long will the Chinese car industry be able to keep investing money, pouring it in and growing? Will they flood the whole world with exports, even to the third world, South America, Africa, India? The solution seems to lie somewhere there. It's very exciting to see what will happen in the car industry. I wouldn't want to be there trying to bet my money on one day this price war will come to an end. I think it has to be decided by the Chinese government to stop it. They shouldn't be allowed to keep operating at a loss. They should tell the provinces that if they don't show profits, they need to slow down the pace. You can't keep manufacturing cars at a loss. We can't keep going like this, subsidizing a huge loss-making operation that could drag the whole society down. So this last man standing game that's going on, eventually, when things settle down, who will be left? Those who remain, however, I think will be strong. So it's a kind of game where only the very strongest will survive. The question is just which ones. How many Chinese companies, how many European, and then we have the American ones. The world that stands outside this war by not allowing any Chinese cars there, maybe that's actually a really smart solution. Who knows? What do you think about this? Feel free to write in the comments if you found this interesting. And what do you think the European car industry should do? What should Chinese industry do? China, the USA, and so on. Take care.